Thank you for the invitation to speak today. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about whether and how we have witnessed a broadening of the feminist political discourse in the United States. I'd like to begin with an op-ed by Maureen Dowd that I came across in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago, which was entitled, "Don't Send in the Clones." And it struck me very strongly that she was talking very much, I'm a professor and I've had numerous roommates, about this new phenomenon of roommate matching services, that students go online through a Facebook application and they figure out who they can room with based on their interests, based on their habits, based on their political persuasions. And this is actually done by students primarily to make sure that students don't room with certain people, right? It's to root out the kinds of students that they don't want to room with. And for Maureen Dowd, this is a very troubling situation, because part of the college experience is living with people who have different political views, study habits, and messiness quotients, as she calls it. And she finds a random selection of roommates from a diverse pool. She finds that this phenomenon actually helps toughen you up and broaden you for the rest of your life. She likens this more random selection of college students getting roommates as a Darwinian evolution of cross-pollination with diverse strains, and that this cross-pollination of diverse strains actually ends up promoting species development. So what I'd like to do is ask a question for the rest of the audience, which is whether, does the same hold true for the term feminist? Does feminism have diverse strains? And if it does cross-pollination among these different strains equally promote its rhetorical and political development? So that's the question I pose today. From a historical context, I think it's very clear that early feminists were not a monolithic group. While they supported the right to vote and women's suffrage, early feminists differed on how that should happen. There was large disagreement over the processes of how the movement should be put forth. So Susan B. Anthony believed in a very single-minded approach to women's suffrage, rephrasing a popular gospel passage to the following: "Seek first the kingdom of the ballot, and all things else shall be added." Elizabeth Cady Stanton favored a more broad perspective of women's suffrage in light of the principles of representative government. But they also differed on their approaches to suffrage. I think it's very fair to say that Stanton provided a more intellectual perspective on the matter, rooted as she was in the positivist theories of Herbert Spencer and Auguste Comte, while Susan B. Anthony emphasized the field of political action. She even likened prayer to political action, and for her, prayer by action would ultimately become prayer by ballots. So you can see very strongly sort of the practical orientation of Susan B. Anthony. But finally, Christian religion itself was an area of vigorous disagreement among these two women. For Stanton, towards her later years, her view of the church was that it was a police institution, and she helped write a work entitled "The Bible and the Church Degrade Women," while for Anthony, the church, in Anthony's view, was just as progressive as any other institution in American public life. So despite their differences on the processes of women's suffrage, on their intellectual approaches to women's suffrage, on their approaches to religion, generally speaking, they saw eye to eye on the movement, and they saw eye to eye on the principle of individuality that underlined the movement. For Stanton, individuality was the first metaphysical principle and a political principle. And for Stanton, politics itself was the most exalted of sciences. While Anthony believed very strongly, similarly, in individuality, this was very much rooted in her Quaker sensibility, in her desire to sort of let the inner light of conscience shine forth. This was reflected very strongly in an adage that she used quite frequently: think for yourself. So what I'd like to do is ask the question, how has this principle of individuality influenced the recent group of pro-life feminist candidates running for political office this year, a year that's been dubbed the Year of the Pro-Life Woman. There was a piece put out in the American Prospect about 4 years ago. I believe the title was Body Politics. And the authors of the piece argued that it was correct to characterize pro-life policies, its grassroots efforts, and its political leadership as a movement. And while I profess not to be an expert in either the pro-life or pro-choice movements, I have dedicated my academic career to studying a range of social movements. I started my interest looking in the region of Latin America, studying movements from the independence movement to environmental movements. I've looked at the phenomenon of Latino faith-based organizations in American inner cities. And currently I'm studying the movements of immigration reform and immigration control in the United States. So what I'd like to do is understand what's happening in light of what is called the social movements literature. And I'd first like to start with a definition of social movement. And here I'm going to paraphrase the work of David Meyer and Sidney Tarrow. For them, social movements have a structural, a cultural, and a rhetorical focus. At the structural level, social movements challenge the existing political order by limiting the arrangements of power. At the cultural level, movement participants hold common objectives, they hold common values, and they act in solidarity with one another for the purposes of the movement. And finally, at the rhetorical level, social movements operate as intervening agents that hold sustained dialogue with a range of political actors in public life. So I want to start with the structural dimension and sort of analyze the pro-life movement through this threefold definition. Political legislation over the last decade has served in many cases to limit access to abortion or placed restrictions on abortion. It has aided the scrutinizing of the existing arrangements of political power. During the 2000s, at the federal level, new legislative niches were created to place restrictions on abortion that were perceived as incremental in nature. So anything like the Born Alive Infants Protection Act in 2002 to the Unborn Victims of Violence Act in 2004, coined the Lacey and Connor Law. And then in 2007, when the Supreme Court upheld the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act of 2003. These were real